All right, hello. This is just a short video that I'm recording completely unprepared. So if I'm doing like please uh, don't feel too offended. I'm sorry for this in advance. Furthermore, this is a highly technical video that I'm basically recording in order to enable other people who want to join developing the app to understand what it does and how it does this. And yeah, basically give these people an idea of how to code for Zettlr, because obviously it does not suffice only to know how to code JavaScript, but also you need to know how the app itself works, because let's be honest, each program requires like a known logic, how things are going, where the state actually is, what happens if you trigger something, and like every program is really difficult to understand. So this video is basically me doing a screen cap in and using one real problem in order to show you how to solve a problem. So today I'm gonna have a look at this pull request because it has been opened in May 2020 by someone who wanted to contribute, but and he was coding something which actually did a new functionality, which is add a new Zettlr by clicking on a generated ID. So the basic idea was that you can write an ID, and when you attempt to open it using Zettlr, that it would not only try to open it and do nothing if it doesn't exist, but actually create it if it doesn't exist. So, and then this pull request basically sprang out, and what I realized was while looking through the code that I found myself thinking, well, this is like it works, but it's like completely too there's too much going on because all the functionality we need is already there, but some pieces of this need to be pushed into a different place inside the app, and then basically what suffices is after reorganizing the app, what suffices is one new setting and basically one line of code. This is all that is to it. And by using this, I want to show as many principles that govern the way Zettlr works internally as possible. It will not be completely exhaustive, of course, but it might help many of you in understanding why Zettlr works like this and to identify ways in which it doesn't work like I personally imagine it to be. So just that you can be a little bit more sovereign in what it actually does and how it works. Because let's be honest, the code base of Zettlr is uh, several thousands of lines of code up until now, and it's likely going to grow, especially now that the new file system abstraction layer has been implemented. So uh, I think it's only fair to give you, to so to speak, some initial guidance of how to actually code something in Zettlr. And well, let's just get started before I talk myself into death. So basically what we are going to do is implement this feature. Add a new Zettlr by clicking on a newly generated ID, using as much of the functionality within Zettlr that is already present, and also showing to reorganize stuff. So let's head into the source code. This is basically just the current develop branch on which I am. So in future videos, it will be, or like if you clone the repository in future times, it will look different, obviously, but I hope that most of the stuff will stick around. So each Electron app basically requires two things. First, a main process, which in Zettlr is main, and at least one renderer process, which is the renderer. Optionally, there are more than one renderer process. For instance, we have these quick look windows, we have the print window, we have the log viewer. These are all renderer processes that are not as sophisticated as the main renderer, but in essence, they are also renderers. Zettlr itself also makes use of a common directory, which contains simply common stuff that both the main process and the renderer process needs. For instance, we have an assets folder for CSS, fonts, images, and so on that both processes need. Fun fact, the fonts are only needed by the renderer, but needed by multiple renderers, which is why they are in the common folder. And we have these assets folders also in the main process. The export templates, for instance, are only needed for the main process, which exports stuff. And we have the same at the renderer process, where there is only like the code mirror plugins are only needed within the main renderer process, which means the main window. So if we just run this code, obviously, what it does, obviously, is run the stuff, currently with a lot of log output that I think will be gone in one of the next versions. It's basically me trying to understand what the file system does, because I had no idea what would happen if I run it the first time. And now it works, basically. So here we have the app. And what we're gonna do is, if we have like one file, let's take this this one here. So we can link stuff. I'm just using the default options here. Default link start, default link end. It might be that you have different options here, but I'm gonna disregard all of this. So basically the most of the stuff is on default. So currently, if we have this link in here, I can hold down the Alt button, Option button, depending on the platform, click on it, and what it will do is trying to open it. In this case, it will open my template.txt and also search for my template. So this is basically two functions that work at the same time. First, it tries to open something, and secondly, it also searches for the same thing. The basic idea behind this was, if there is no file, you can at least see, does anything link to this? To kind of decide, do I need to create this file, or did I just make a typo that I have to fix? So basically, two functions are triggered at once, and what is happening now if I, for instance, let's get rid of this. If I enter, I don't know, some ID. So this ID does not exist because I just generated it. So if I click on it, it will search for it, and obviously it finds only one file because only one file is referencing it, but nothing else happens. And what the idea is that this click would now in the background also have created this file. So the thing is, what do we do and how do we do it? Using basically all the functionality that is at the core of Zettlr. So let's just quickly quit this and head into the stuff. First start that personally I have to do every time I code some new feature, because I just forget where something is among all these files. For instance, this utility folder has just like exploded, and this was not my idea, but well, anyway. And what helps is to look, where are we? If you remember, we have clicked on something in the editor. So a good place to start is to open up the editor class, which is currently still way too long, with like 1,400 lines of code, and it's JavaScript. And then you realize, okay, if you click something with the Alt key pressed, there is only two things where this can happen. Either just an event listener that listens for mouse clicks, or the same event listener but wrapped by Code Mirror. So, and Code Mirror is the editor at the core of the app. So basically, there are two possibilities. If something happens with the editor, it can either be within the editor class or within the body class. And it basically somehow depends on, it basically depends a little bit on where you actually are. But in this case, I know that it's in the editor class. So let's have a look at what happens. At least I think it's in the editor class, because they are in the constructor, which is also ridiculously long, because the constructor is like 700 lines of code or something like this. 500, okay. Here, we have the wrapper element and we have a click listener. So if neither the Alt key nor the Control key is pressed, just return true, which is kind of a hassle, because I find myself always wanting to command click stuff, so I think I have to revisit this logic as well. And then let's see, if the element, the target of this click has the class tag, then do such an auto search. If it has a link, do an auto search with this parameter true. And if it's just a link with this circumflex at the beginning, this means that it's a footnote that should be edited. Some of the functionality which also should not be in the editor, but the code base is long and, well, you know how the drill get. So we know that this function seems to be at the heart of what we need. So let's head over to this. It does not really find where it's created, but this renderer is the Zettlr renderer. So if you just click there, I think, yeah, parent, what is parent? No idea. Yeah, so, but I know it's the renderer. So we now, I think it was called, yeah, auto search. So let's just search for auto search. And we have force open equals false. And we know that it's going to true if it's a link, and it's false if it's a tag. So what we could basically also implement is to create files based on tags you click. But let's not do this. Let's not get wild. So as soon as this force open flag is set to true, this means that the editor will also try to force open a file, like described in this comment. And also, if you're one of the guys who write code without commenting stuff, this is why you comment stuff. So, and basically we have a super bad... So this is the first thing. Sometimes I just code stuff that it works and it's super verbose, and you can actually see that we can reduce this thing here. Let's take this out, because this is something we always do. And now if it's open, if the flag force open, what? Okay, here you see how functionality of the app is actually evolving around the time, because apparently at one point it was explicitly meant not to open any file, either to open a file or to search for something. I have no idea why I would have that, but well, long night. So we can just make this easier. So now we know that auto search will also will always set the search term in the toolbar. So basically the global search bar that we have, it will just open this and also begin a search. So this will this function basically just takes all the files that are in the current directory and begin a search based on this. And if the force open flag is also set, this means that this command is being sent to the main process. So this is something specific to Electron, because basically the main process can be seen as some form of server and the renderer process as some form of client. And this is the same as, for instance, sending something over a WebSocket or during a AJAX request, something like this. It's just called IPC, inter-process communication, because this is operating using pipes and all the other stuff, which I myself think I did not completely understand right now, but let's keep this aside. We just need to know that this actually sends the command force open with this content to the main process. So as of now, the IPC is still completely the IPC is completely centralized. So every IPC call from the renderer goes through one object instance, which is the renderer IPC down here, and every communication from the main process does the same with the class called a Zettlr IPC. I plan to decentralize this in the future, but for now it's working, and you know how it goes, never change a running system. So we are basically looking for the force open here in the main process. And we do have it. And we see that the application, which is the main class, has this method called findExact with the content, and the content, we remember, is the term that we sent, which is, if we look back to the editor where we started, element text is basically the inner text of the element with this class. So just to make this a little bit more clear right now, So, all right. So we have here our link, and if I hold down the Option key, you can see, aha, it's clickable. And if I click it, then this code will execute. And what it does is basically, if we go into the developer tools, here, this is a span with this class, cm zkn link, and it just takes the inner text. This is something that works closely with the highlighting mode that I built for this thing. So there's a lot of assumption in there, but we know that it will simply take everything that has been detected as a link. So everything that is underlined will just be taken and used by the code. So this is so the inner text is what will be transmitted to the main process and passed to this function findExact. So let's have a look at findExact. So also one interesting thing which I really value about the ESLint linting code standard is that function definitions have this space between the first parentheses and the function name, which makes it really easy to find the definition of a function and not something that calls this function. So here we have the term, and what it does is it tries first to find the file apparently based on the ID property, and if this does not work, it tries the same with the name, and if it has an extension, then it tries to do the same without the extension. And yes, basically what it does is inside a link you have no extensions. So you never have this .md, .cs or whatever in there, but only the file name itself. So if I just use something, you can see here there's basically this md that is not in there. The good thing is then you could have this file .md and this file .text, and it would basically match both of them. It's kind of fuzzy, and basically what you would want concerning what you want concerning a Zettlr custom, because some things can change, so keep it fuzzy. So basically it's trying to see if we have an extension, it will just find the file that corresponds to this exact name, and if it does not have one, it just tries name.md, name.text, name.txt, because this file types thing is basically just an array containing all the allowed file types that Zettlr actually can display, which is only markdown text and LaTeX files, which means we could very, very easily transform the whole thing into like VS Code 2.0, but we're not going to do this. And if the file has been found, what it does is send out a command to actually open this file. So force open basically means it searches for this file and then sends back a command as if you would have clicked on this file. So what we need to do is, if this is false, so if file equals 0, we need an additional line of code that actually creates this file and then sends the new file down there. Obviously, it's not just one line of code, but basically this is the feature that we want to do. So first what we need to do, and which I also outlined here somewhere in somewhere here I outlined that we actually should use this thing and make a command from it, because when I first wrote the app, it was everything with one directory, and I had like 20 classes, all of them prefixed with Zettlr. And my aim is to actually get rid of all of these so that I can divide everything. Currently, my approach is to have providers, and these providers are defined by always running and providing functionality across the application. Each of these classes registers some event handlers and callbacks on the global object, so that from everywhere within this application you can actually call some functionality. For instance, what we will be needing is the config provider, which deals with the configuration, and what it does is at some point let's just quickly find this. Here, register something on the global. So basically, within Zettlr, if you need some functionality that's already there, what you can always do is global dot and then the identifier, which is basically defined in here. You have global config, you have global, I think, tags. I'm not sure. Can just look here. Yeah, global tags. Something like this. This is how you find it. And in this case, we have global config get some option, and then we can get a configuration option, which is pretty handy. Actually, this configuration is also exactly accessible in the renderer as well. And then it just pulls down the configuration option from the main process, but it works exactly the same in both processes. So this is really handy. So these are the providers. Basically, you cannot access the object itself because the object is just stored in here somewhere, and it just provides stuff. So obviously, this is not something that we need provided, but it's basically some form of a command. And luckily, we already have a long list of commands that do something. You can see deletion of a directory, a new project within a directory, project export, sorting, and so on, all the stuff. So what we need is a new command. And due to simplicity reasons, I just look for something smaller than this. Come on. So just copy this whole thing out, then new file. Now we need a good command name. Let's call it yeah, just let's. Good names are always something pretty important, and this is why I always fail at this. Let's call it forceopen.js, because forceopen basically corresponds to the command that is being sent here. So just keep as much as necessary. So what we now want to do is just take this, remove this, and just so what I just did was make sure that we don't get over 80 columns. It's not always working, but I try to adhere a little bit to this. So just let this name this thing. Now we get errors. If you're wondering why I export the class at the end, this is something that I just began doing, and I'm not sure I need this every time right now, because, for instance, the utility functions that are not as old as the commands basically make use of just exporting this. If there's just a function and this function does not require recursion, I just export this now. So if you spot something like this, if you want to do some chores in the repository, you could take all the commands and basically do this, something like this. But I'm not doing this to make it. I'm not doing it right now because it should be like a different process of doing this. So what this does is basically it listens to an IPC event. So this has to correspond to something. Has to correspond to something that is being sent to the main process. If it does not, then you basically have a problem because nothing is gonna react to this, and then you get something in the logs that is called. Let's see. Yeah, this. You basically get this whenever you have something, some event where nothing is going to. Why does this work? Because getTags is registered in the main IPC class, and this is one of the reasons why I need to decentralize this stuff, because most events are currently handled by the main class, but some are still left in the IPC class, and it's kind of not consistent. So but now let's continue here. If you want to know how this whole Zettlr command extension and stuff works, You can have a look here, because this is basically the base class that is being extended by all commands, which is just keeping it dry and remove some stuff that otherwise would be necessary. So let's go here. Here's basically what will be run during this event. So we know that within the arc we have the term, and I think that it actually contains the term itself. But first, what we need to do is basically just take all of this shit and remove this stuff from here. Have everything just put it in here. Just for now. Yes, Linter, hate me, please. So, and then we need to remove this, because if the IPC does not see this command, then it will try to automatically run it through the application, and running something through the application means to run the command. And why do you not like me anymore? So obviously we also need the file types here. Let's just put it in. So, and now I just need to know what arc is. So, doing the very stupid stuff. The event, I'm not quite sure why I implemented this parameter, because basically you can register many commands for many such events for one command, which might in the future be also important. I'm not sure. But basically you can implement several commands within one command, which might come in handy. I just thought, let's leave this functionality in there, because better have it than not. So, and what we're gonna do now is just restart this thing. Whoa. Clean this thing, and then see what is being spit out on the console after we did this. So, let's just trigger the functionality. The search is already working, because the search is not something that is affected by what we're currently doing. So let's have a look at the console, and we see nothing. Whoa, that's a bummer. Wait a moment for something. Oh, I knew this would be handy. So first open, cannot find module data. Yeah. Whoopsie. Why did I do this? Yeah, these are the new shortcuts, and I'm not used to closing just a single tab with Command W instead of the whole application. Well. So it can't find this stuff, because we just moved the whole function one level down. So yeah, now it should work. And the fans of my laptop are really frightening me. So let's try it again and have a look at the thing. As you can see, it's actually outputting this twice. Why does it do this? This is not good. But nevertheless, we see the contents are actually only what is supposed to be opened. And we know that this is either an ID or the file name. In any case, if I understand the issue correctly, the idea is to actually create a file. This functional search for a file with the exact name of what is in the tag. If it found it, it is open. New file with that name is created in the current directory and then open. So basically, arc is the file name. Let's just make this a little bit more verbose. So what do we have? This FSL is not correct, because we're not in the application anymore. This is basically gotten here, because if any command is instantiated, what it does is save the application for later use, because obviously this would come in handy. So what we need is this application with the getter, the respective for the file system, and you can basically see these. I think at the end, yeah, here you have like several getters for stuff, and I think this is obsolete. I'm not sure. I have to tend for this later. There's a lot of dead code inside the code base because there are so many construction sites at once. So if you find something like this where you can be sure, okay, this is never going to be called, chances are pretty good that it just can be trashed. Just keep an eye out for this, and if unsure, just ask on GitHub or on the forum. If you find something like this, chances are good that it's actually trash if you think it's trash. But getting back to this, so we have basically we need this in front of this. So we have the file types. We need path. No. Let's just add this in here. Turn is actually the file name. Look, we can even make the code more beautiful. So, because now we actually know what's going on. Right. By the way, in case you're wondering why I'm checking for extension lengths greater than 1 instead of greater than 0, it's because the extensions that path_name spits out is always with the dot in front. And I think it also spits out just the dot, so if it's greater than 0, then it could mean that it's not having any extension whatsoever. And basically now we are ready to check it out, because basically, like this application of the file, yeah. So basically this should exactly work like before now. What we just did was basically simply port this command into here. So if we try this now, we should have the same functionality. So let's just link to something like this, and it's not open. Wow. And it's because of a promise. Oh God. So now we're basically getting into the void, because Node is pretty cool in telling you there's some promise that has been rejected, but you don't know which one, and it's not going to tell you this. So you basically have to trial and error this yourself. And most of these promise rejections are within asynchronous functions, where you basically also have rejections if an error is thrown. For instance, if you mixed up any commands. So what I'm just doing here is, oh my god, just trying this. It's really bad, but it's JavaScript, so bear with me. Oh, and my linter is not the nicest one. So if we now try this, like this. First open, find exec of undefined. There we are. So pretty sure I did. Yeah. Why the? Yeah, this is something. If I code, it's like a static in some way. And you know what I just realized? Yeah. Why make it utterly complicated? So it's somehow the equivalent of saying, look, mom, I saved like 80 characters. But this should work now. Let's try this. State, what the fuck, state? Oh boy. Let's just. So now the great cycle of debugging begins. Oh, yeah. I normally don't. I normally don't do this, and now I know why. Oh boy. So now it should work. If you don't understand what I just did, better not try, because this is like utterly ugly. But now, ta-da! We got this stuff working again. So, by the way, you may have noticed that I always restart the application every time, because whenever something in the main process changes, you have to reload the whole main process, and this means restarting the app. If you change something in the renderer, you can just hit F5 to reload the renderer. This suffices then. So, I'm not doing this because this is basically even longer than what I managed to save concerning space. Oh boy. And this is guaranteed to work. So now, just get rid of this ugly thing. Oh boy. So basically now we have the functionality here that attempts to find an exact match, and if it does, send it down there. So, but what we also need to do is basically open a creative file if the user wants this. So here we are at the problem which you will most likely be encountering several times, because a lot of stuff in Zettlr is being directed by using preferences setting, because I, for instance, don't want Zettlr to create some files without me actually knowing this, because deleting these files if I don't actually want them is pretty hard. Some people do this in their workflow, and to accommodate them, basically to accommodate both options that we basically have, to create a file or not to create a file if something was not found, we just do a preferences option, which is the most common thing, because this way you can keep it the way some people are used to, but also add the new functionality to the people who want this. So in order to implement new features, for instance, it's always a good idea to think about, can we use a preference for this? So, but this is now working, so what we're going to do is just commit this thing. I have everything. Yes. Normally I don't do this checking, but normally I don't record a video and have to make it more or less safe. So, but this is working. So I'll just run the changelog. And out and away. So now we got this thing out of the way, and now it's time to implement the new functionality. So let's just close all this stuff. Again, this is something that I found is helpful, to just close all the files and pull up again those that you actually need. So what we now need to do is first implement a setting for this, so that it can actually be done. What we need to do is modify the templates. First, we need First, we need to add the configuration parameter itself. So here we have the config, and the config basically works that this config template, CFG TPL, that this variable basically controls which versions which options are actually acceptable for the configuration and which are not. So basically, whenever you tamper with your own configuration file on your computer, this will make sure that it's always same to use. So if you put in some super rubbish values, it will just throw them out on load. Basically, we can use this. It's also not completely consistent because my ideas of how this should be saved have changed as well. For instance, let's be honest, this should maybe not be in the config, but more in a state that we can maintain. But like you will find a lot of these things around the app. And if you think something does not really add up, the chances are good that it's just legacy code, old legacy code that one can maybe change. If you're curious if you can actually change something, just hit me up on GitHub or forum. So, but what we want to do is basically, what kind of functionality is it? In what domain does this go? Definitely not the replacements. Does it have something to do with display? I would say no. So now we basically can think, is it editor related or is it more Zettlr related? And I'm personally very much in favor of saying that this is Zettlr related. So what we're gonna do is just add a new one here to Vim. So now we might want to add more of these auto creation stuff things later on if I got the mentality of the people over on GitHub correctly, and that a lot of people are actually like, yeah, we need more fuzziness, more create files, create this, create that. So yeah, I think this is verbose enough. Oh my god, this is not going to work here. Chip. No, god. Let's do it like this. So I'm presetting this with Wolf because all the things that are, all the values of these keys are basically the defaults that Zettlr will be using. So for instance, link with file name always means that the default is always. And this is basically something I just put in there to remind myself and other people that these are some options, because we also need a way now to let the people control the config, because nobody is going to open up the config JSON and manually edit this false to a true if they want it. So let's head over to our resources, because the templates are written in handlebars, and we have the preferences.handlebars, which is basically a huge pile of boilerplate. So in order to find what we want to see, let's just start the app again and have a look at where we could put this thing. So I think I don't like it that this is not lined up correctly. Where do I put it? When linking files at the file name, always. I mean, this radio button group and the checkboxes that we need to create are basically tied together, and we need both of them. So basically, it will only make this worse. But we may get more variables, and this is like unlikely going to change. So I think I can just, you know, this is like the most difficult part of programming if you have to do UX yourself. But I think I'm just gonna go if we have this. This is pretty empty. And it fills up a little bit. This is pretty difficult because basically every position is equally good and bad at the same time, but I'm just gonna attach it down here because I'm a UX monster. So I need to find this tabs. The tabs are actually powered by jQuery UI at this moment. I want to change this in the future, but for now, this is where we go. This box left and its equivalent box right are being used to make sure that there are two boxes that are exactly 50%, so that we can stuff more options into one pane of the thing. And here you can see this whole variable stuff. And yes, here I was too lazy to translate this because it's basically a fixed name, so it does not need translation, in my opinion. So here we have the HR link behavior description. So here we are. We have this checkbox group, which is one radio button, and we have 3 of them, and we want to stuff in the other thing after here. So just put this here because now we just need to copy some stuff and precisely this one. Let's take it and paste it. So, and now we have to make sure not to forget something. So first we have to get a name, and the name must correspond exactly to this. So setkn dot autocreate linked files. This is basically just a convention because this makes a lot of code unnecessary if we stick to these dot notation. I took this over from the way Laravel handles a lot of stuff. So if you're wondering about why I did certain things the way I did them, chances are very, very, very great that I actually pulled them over from Laravel because Laravel is doing a lot of stuff right. Albeit PHP is a somewhat different language. Actually, you could put any value in here because we're gonna throw it away anyway. So it's basically just a lot of copy and paste because HTML is pretty verbose. So, and for now I'm just very lazy. This internationalization also works with these dot notations. I'm gonna get back to this later on. Here we have to actually check if this is true or false. So now we are basically ready for this. Let me just, no, that's correct. So let me just back. So now we have the template set correctly. Just or oh god. And here we have to be very careful with the wording because this might also suggest that Zettlr also creates files if you just search something. So let's do this. Let's make this clear so we know exactly what this is. Auto-create linked files also implies don't auto-create files, but auto-create files that are linked. So it's pretty important, as I've learned, because this way you reduce the uncertainty of users um, checking some settings. And actually, there's a lot of programs out there, just as a side note, a lot of project out there where you have like a setting and you read it and you read it and you read it over and over again. You are not quite sure what exactly it does because it does not really address all the implications it makes. And I think Zettlr also has some of these, but I try to keep them as low as possible. So now we have this checkbox group. But the thing is, just being in this form doesn't automatically make it go into the preferences. So what we now need is to go back to the renderer, and there I got a corresponding dialog class for all the dialogues in the app. So basically, most of these are pretty lame. For instance, this class has been pretty lame until I added some real-time statistics. But basically, oh god, this is something where user interface design is pretty bad because it also automatically tries to jump if I just change the tabs up here. And you know what the bad thing is? Zettlr does exactly the same. And now I feel bad for implementing this. But this is quite a different topic that I need to tackle afterwards. So basically, these dialogues have two functions. They work exactly like the commands. They extend a base class that implements most of the functionality, like positioning it, calling it, closing it, blah blah blah. And it has basically two functions that we can override. First, the pre-init, which is called after the data has been processed and to enlarge the data. For instance, here with what languages are available, whether or not the option for dark mode should be shown or not. Something basically that we cannot account for in the templates. And then it also has a post-act thing, which is basically if you ever encounter a method that has like act in it, it's shorthand for activate and activates all event listeners that somehow are needed. So basically, post-act, because the base class will also activate already like the save and the cancel button and make sure that on each resize of the window, the dialog is replaced so that the position stays the same and so on and so on. So after this has been done, then you can basically trigger other stuff. And the preference window is actually full of this, but what we actually care for is proceed, which is a function that is being called with the data from the form. So what do we need to do? We have here standard preferences and display checkboxes, because HTML is so cool. It basically doesn't include an element if it's not checked, and it includes it if it is checked. Which is kind of a bummer, but yeah, I've been doing this. This is a lot of boilerplate. Please don't hurt me. So what we are actually wanting to do is do this, and then copy over this whole way too long line, and then just put this in here. Now we can be sure that this config is either true or false, depending on whether this element is in there. And this is basically also why you could basically put any value you like in there. So if you're feeling really stupid, you can, I don't know, put a quote from Shakespeare in there. But in fact, I don't like Shakespeare, so maybe I'm gonna remove it again. But basically, we don't care about this. We only care about if the checkbox is there or not. So then we can be sure that this will be sent over to the main process, and basically everything required for this to work is already in place. So it should work now out of the box. So let's just recreate the handlebars templates. We need to precompile them and start this, and then have a look if it works. Well, all right, it's getting a little bit dark outside, so this is too So now let's check what the preferences template says, and the preferences template doesn't like me. What is happening? Oh boy. I thought this was such a great idea, and it turns out it wasn't. Like so many things in life. Basically, I'm using this this intermediary thing that is not yet translated to think of wordings in English that make clear what this option does and what not. This option obviously is not good, but I'm going to think about this later on. Now I have to, oh god, I forgot to compile the templates. Now, ta-da! And here we have it. Oh, this is one hell of a user interface. You see basically why this is important to think about, because this does not look good. So it's false because this was a default. So let's just save it to true. Let's see if it, yep, it persists in memory. And now if we restart the app, it should also be persisted. Ta-da! So basically now we have everything in place to implement the actual thing. So let's just close this down, close this down, close this down, because we don't need this anymore. Now we get back to the command that we just created there. So, and as I've told you, basically you do this and you get the corresponding value. So what we can do to just like double check this. Normally I don't do this because I just trust that it works, but now for purposes of demonstrating how this works, let's just do this. So, and we also have a promise rejection warning once again. I like you, not. So normally, if the error is not as obvious as now, sometimes it's pretty difficult to spot very obvious errors, and this is somehow frustrating for a lot of times. But in this case, as you can see, I just forgot to add the function name. And now let's solve for the rest. And here we see, should we automatically create files? The corresponding option is set to true. If I now turn this off, just because why not? Yay, I just spotted another error. Oh well. And we have this set to false, so everything cool. So, and the error is if we take the internals of one span, you see that we actually have this one, and also this one, and this is just like tripartite, and it's bad. It's really bad. This should not happen. Yeah, but this is basically how the the code mirror modes work. So I need to actually, I don't know, find another way of doing this, because it's splitting these up, because the O5 has both the class link and search result, and this as well, and the space does not have the class search result in it. And this is basically a problem that I have not really fended to, because currently what you have to do is, in order to make these clickable again, to exit the search. This is not good, but this is these are all kind of small construction sites that do not actually require that much of work to them, but it's basically a lot of stuff at once. So this is why the app sometimes progresses slower than I personally would like, but please bear with me. So, but now we know that the setting is actually recognized and it works. So this is how you basically check for this. So what we now need is check if we could now either do else if this is true, or we can just be lazy. Let's do this. So if we don't have a file and the user said, in case the file does not exist, please do create it, then we can just create the file. And for creating a file, this is actually pretty easy, because now we need to know, okay, file creation is being handled by the file system abstraction layer. This is one reason why I put everything inside this one module. So everything where you need to create, rename, duplicate, move, whatever, something on the file system, the FSAL is your man. So, and this is basically implemented as an action. So you have these actions that I find here, and we have the create file action, and we see that we need just the source options. All right, but we don't have to actually figure this out because we have a command that is called file new. So, and if we have a look at file new, we can basically piggyback a little bit on this file. I'm currently thinking, should we just like recreate this thing, or should we, I don't know. I think we should not recreate this stuff, because a lot of things can go wrong if you create a file. For instance, you have to sanitize the name to not have like these very funny guys who do like this kind of a file name, which I'm not sure what will happen, but I think something with exploding universe. So basically we should not recreate this thing, because inside this command there's a lot going on concerning the question, how do you create a file safely and what could go wrong? And basically this will notify you if something doesn't go wrong. And if we think about it, we have like this application, someone is just typing in a name of which they know that this file does not exist and simply want to create this. This is basically from a user interface perspective. Let's just go back in there to see how this will work out. So from a user perspective, if we have this automatically create a file set to true, then we know if we are in here and we are just like, okay, I just want to, we have this link and this does not exist already, right? So if I click on this, it would not find the file. And we want this to be created. So basically, there are two options. Either they have a link where they believe it already exists, but they're not sure, or they have a link where they are pretty sure that it does not exist. One very, very easy thing is basically just to create a link and just hit Control-L to implement a new ID, which automates a lot of the stuff, because this way you have first a file with this file name, the ID, which means the file will be created, will already have an ID, and this ID will already be in the file name, which is for many people who are using these kinds of nodes pretty easy, because this automates the process of pressing Control-N and pressing Enter. And then also having to link this file back into this, because if I now would hit Enter, it would create the new file, but there would be no link in here. So this is basically a good automation. So in case Zettlr is not able to create this file, we should handle this as if the person has clicked Control-N to consciously create a file. So if you click this link and nothing happens, you will naturally assume that something a foul within the code base itself if you have set this option to true. So you would expect that it gives you some feedback. Hey, yes, I see you want to automatically create a file, but I could not do this, and here's the reason for this. So basically, we just don't copy this thing. And actually, this is kind of a unprecedented case, because I never had one command implement another command. So this is pretty interesting, because I now have to think about how actually to do this. Well, I could just instantiate this thing and call it immediately. Should I do this? Nah. Oh, by the way, I don't have to instantiate it, because let's just look how the main application is actually handling this stuff. And we somehow have somewhere load commands. This commands. Let's just look for this. Run command, event arc. Does this ring a bell? Does this ring a bell? It does ring a bell. So let's just go into the force open. And what we want to do is this app. Run command. Please run me a command. The event is now not the force open, but file new. And also, wait, file new. What does it need? Arc needs hash, else get current dir. All right. If there's a hash in the argument, then it will try this one. We could actually make use of this in a future time where you can choose the directory, but it's like a lot of stuff going on, so I'm not gonna do this here. What do I need to do? Arc name. This is basically the file, so what I need is just the name property, I think. Yes, just the name property. So basically, I'm just passing in this with, I think, this. And we also have to await it, because otherwise here it will be 0 again. So this will make sure that the file is created. And you know what the great thing is? It will also automatically open the file. So basically, we can leave everything else as this. And we can even make this even better to do this else if thing that I just mentioned. Because this way, it will be a little bit more obvious what is happening. We can leave this out, because if the file is not null, it will be null, so just get away. So basically, if the file has been found, just open it. If it doesn't, check if we should create this thing. If it and if this is also false, then do nothing. We could basically add something else here, but we're not gonna do this. And yeah, and we don't need to actually call open file again, because this command is making sure that this open file thingy is running perfectly. And this is what I meant initially, that we can make use of a lot of functionality that is already there, and that we just have to, that we can just make use by recombining it, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And then this should work. And this is basically something where I implement new functionality, and in 99% of all cases, and everyone who is also programming knows this is not going to work. But let's see if it does work. So we have this my text directory, and we are not passing any specific directory, so it will just use and fall back to the current directory, which is this one here. So basically what we expect to do is now, if I click here, to just open the file. and it just opens this file. And if we have a look, we can see that there's no conflict by trying to create this file. So, and this one is not existent. So let's see, because we would expect to have this file .md being created. So let's have a look. And we have 2 times this. What? All right, this is just a shadow. So this is basically what I meant, because you will have these small issues, and I have no idea why we have this file twice and with only one file being updated. This is weird. Right, we have the hash is this one, all right, and the other one is hopefully the same. Yes, it's the same. So I think what is happening here is basically that the auto search that we initiated is interfering with the way the new file is going, because as soon as we enter a search for something, let's just do this. Every time we do this, the actual file contents that are being displayed in the file list are exchanged with something else. And why did... Okay, there's even there's going on even more, because apparently I accidentally this thing is now creating oh my god. This is not good. It should not do this. It definitely should not do this. Why does it do this? Wait a moment. So if we... oh, I know why it does this. Because the actually the toolbar, somewhere, the toolbar, if you trigger the... begin search, renderer begin search. There's something going on there. Just a moment. So if we have this begin search somewhere, begin search. This is not calling the auto search. Huh? All right, basically now we are back in debugging, and this is not really the purpose of this video, because in this video I just wanted to show you what's going on. So basically we have the functionality we want, just a little bit more than we anticipated. So it's working with some artifacts which are basically debugging, and debugging is like everything else as well. And I think I already did this way too long right now. So I'm just gonna stop here, because now you know how to create new preferences in the settings, to where to look and how to find out what you actually want to do, and to salvage as much functionality as needed from within the app. And basically the rest is just standard debugging you have. Just one thing, because this is not a translated string, this is like literally in the preferences. So what we also need to do now is to reopen this thing, and we have here this thing. We need a translation for this. And I already had some questions where like, what should I put in there? And how do I create these translations? The point is, currently you don't, because it's all running on Zettlr translate, which I have to fill. So basically, if you implement something, you have these localization things, and you basically need to stick to somehow this thing. For instance, in this case, it would be easy because you know it's inside the dialog, it's inside the preferences dialog, it's inside the sections on Zettelkasten, and I think what would be appropriate here. Oh, is, let's just say, just notice that these are in not in camel case, but in snake case. Snake case, right? Snake case, camel case. One of the things, because in JavaScript normally you have these inside capitalizations, and here for the translation. I don't know why I started this, but it's very consistent, and please stick to this if you have to create multiple words. And then just take this and wrap this inside a custom handlebars thingy that I wrote called I18N. Pretty straightforward, and then this will be automatically replaced as soon as I have added these things into the translation service and people have translated it. So if you implement a feature that requires a setting or some other strings that have to be translated, just implement the feature and tell me all these identifiers inside your pull request so that I can just throw them into the service, and we have a translation once the pull request actually makes it into a beta or a final release. And that's it, I think. More questions, please. In this case, not on YouTube where I'm hosting this, but please go to GitHub, the forum, or someplace else, because this is like really internal stuff. And if you're watching this not knowing what Zettlr is, feel free to check it out. Now you know how messy it looks from the inside, and well, I hope everybody else who wants to contribute to the application, I warmly welcome any contributions, and you should have gotten more or less a big chunk of what is actually going on. And I think I have not watched the time, but I think I was over an hour right now. So it takes some time, but let's face it, 1 hour is not long for a full new feature, and minus debugging, everything is so far implemented. So, and so much from me today. See you.